Welcome everybody, Damien Erskine here once again. Got a question this week, thought it was a perfect opportunity to do another video. This week somebody wrote in, can you teach me how to play over giant steps? And I may have covered different aspects of this in different articles, but I thought I would talk about how I work on difficult tunes. Jazz standards and such especially. Two things come to mind when I think about students and the struggles they've had playing and beginning to explore tunes like giant steps, which are not diatonic. They move around a lot. The first is that often you just try and go too fast. Just because the recording you like of this tune has a band playing at 200 BPM or even 150 or even 120 doesn't matter so much. I have jokingly in rehearsals when we're working on a section that's tricky, I'll often say let's work it at tempo di lerno, which means let's slow it down and let's give ourselves time to think and move. And when working through a tune like this, if you're struggling with it, that might mean slowing it down to 50 BPM. It doesn't matter. I find that the best way to work through difficult tunes, difficult sets of changes, is to, step one, play them as a ballad. No matter what tune it is, no matter what it is, I'll start practicing it as if it was a ballad. And years ago, I used to even just work at them out of time, just one chord at a time, fully exploring each chord and then moving to the next, and maybe even back and forth a little bit, and then moving on to the next chord. There's no hurry, and if you're just ramming through the thing at 180 BPM, you're not giving yourself time to really work on the changes. So step one, slow it way down. Step two is, I find that a lot of my students just don't seem to have the patience initially until until we really get going, to work on chord tones. Now, playing a tune like this, you really need to be able to hit those chord tones. You really need to be able to outline those changes. And the best way to do that is by using chord tones. Once you're comfortable with chord tones, then we can work on the in-between notes, the upper extension or upper structure triads, 2, 4, 6 of the scale essentially for each chord. Now, Giant Steps is actually a nice song to work on as far as more difficult tunes go, because each chord type they're all basic chord types. There's no crazy altered chords. There's no crazy alternate modes of different scales that you're not familiar with that you need to run through. You can play through Giant Steps using major scale harmony if you want. Every chord is either major, minor, or dominant. So I implore you, and I've written a number of articles on this, to initially just start practicing arpeggios through the changes. Get those different chord types down, playing root, third, fifth, and seventh of the chord. And those, of course, as relating to the major scale. Major 7 chord, you play 1, 3, 5, 7 of the major scale from that root. Dominant chord, major scale with a flat 7. Minor chord, flat 3, flat 7. So in this case, I would, because they're all essentially shifting 2 5s, I would probably play, I would play Dorian for all of the minor chords if you're getting into full chord scale type stuff, because that's my general rule of thumb. If it's a 2 5, major 2 5, the minor chord is Dorian. If it's a static minor chord, then you have a little more flexibility. You can treat it as minor, Dorian, melodic minor, harmonic minor, kind of whatever you want. You can kind of, depending on the sound you want to go for and the way it relates to the changes around it. But I digress. So, Giant Steps. And bing, there should be a PDF popping up right there in the screen. so you can read along with the changes. Essentially, I would start with this by maybe working out of time, just focusing on each chord one at a time. Playing that B major 7. And really making sure I have that arpeggio down. You just do it in 1 octave, whatever is comfortable, wherever in the neck is comfortable. When I first work on this stuff, I like to work wherever it's comfortable for me to work. And then as I get more able with the process, then start setting restrictions on myself. Be like, okay, I can play all the root position arpeggios, but I'm jumping all over the neck. So now let me try it all in one position. Now let me try it all in the middle of the neck. So you want to start from a place of knowing. Start from a place where you're fairly comfortable with what you're doing. And then slowly add layers of difficulty and build from a place of knowing, so you're building a strong foundation, trying not to leave any gaps in your studies. So I would work through 1 chord at a time to D7, flat 7, G major, I would do that in root position. Then I would do all of the inversions, which instead of going 1, 3, 5, 7, you take that first inversion means you take that bottom note, the root, and put it on top. So now you have 3, 5, 7, 1 of each chord. This gets you, and especially helpful for us bass players because we're so root-centric, root-oriented in our playing, it starts training us to see the other notes of the scale, other chord tones, and ultimately other notes of the full chord scale. Then instead of having to always jump to the root and then move to the next note, even mentally. Initially, when you're playing first inversion arpeggios, you'll probably be doing that. Be thinking, okay, here's my B, that means there's my third. There's my G, that means there's my third. Which is fine. It just takes repetition. It takes a fair amount of repetition. But you want to be able to play all inversions. 3, 5, 7, 1, first inversion. 5, 7, 1, 3, second inversion. 7, 1, 3, 5, third inversion. So if you can play through the tune, just give each chord 4 beats. Play a full arpeggio. And then do it all in first inversion. So you're really starting to hone in on the chord tones as relating to those chords. And then that begins to make the process easier when it comes to improvising over changes or even walking through changes. When you're improvising, you're essentially wanting to create a melody through the changes on the fly. And that predetermines that you know what notes are available to you for every chord type. So there's really no way around it. It may seem a little tedious when you do it. You may not think you're getting that much out of it, but if you do it, as my students, most of my students can attest to, if you actually make yourself do it, all of a sudden you realize, hey, this isn't as hard as it used to be. When I open up a new tune and we play through it, and they go, oh, I can find this stuff now. It helps. Especially because as I'm walking or soloing through changes, essentially what I'm doing is looking ahead at changes coming up and picking target notes. I'm deciding where I want to land ahead of time. So then it's a matter of just getting from here to there. So that said, here's how I might practice playing through giant steps as a ballad. Now, one more, and I'll start playing in a second, I promise. People tell me I talk too much in these things, but it's important that you get the concepts. I don't like lessons where people just rip through stuff and say do it because you don't know what that was. So I like to over-explain things. When I'm playing through changes, I'm in a constant state of, like I said, knowing where I am on the chord and then looking at what's coming up and deciding where I want to go from there, picking a target note, as I said. An important aspect of your practice might be the art of voice leading, which sounds very fancy, but essentially all it means is that you are playing a chord tone for a chord, and then looking at the next chord coming up and playing the nearest chord tone to where you already are. In classical music, you'll often do it with 3 or 4 voices at a time, and in fact I do like doing that with chord shapes. And so on. But here we're just going to talk about single note voice leading through changes. If you're practicing walking, you can practice playing just half notes at a slow tempo, starting with the root B, but then when we move to D7, instead of moving to that D, you think, what's the nearest chord tone? You're a half step away from the flat 7 of D7. So from B to C, G major, back to B, B flat, then you're already on the 5th of E flat, stay there. That's how you can practice that as a bass line. I'm going to do something similar while I'm playing through these changes. And I might get a little ornamental, I might have a little bit of fun, but essentially I'm mostly just trying to voice lead through changes. If I only voice led, it would sound like this. I'll start on a high B. Try and make it sound like music, even when I'm doing an exercise. I think that's important. No matter what you're playing, make it sound like music. This could start to sound like major 7, or maybe a little more in. Stay on the C sharp, that's the 9, which is nice. Sharp 11 there on the major chord just because. So there's a little example, and you can probably hear a few little motifs, little rhythmic phrases that I could move through changes. I'm always listening for little melodic content ideas. So if I hear a little do, I might try and move that and make it, change the notes to make it appropriate for the next set of changes and repeat that rhythmic phrase. And then you can respond to it, essentially pose the question, maybe pose it a few times, and then respond to it. So these are the things, these are the kind of the building blocks of good improvisations. It's, a lot of the motivic development, the motifs kind of go in, and we hear people say, tell a story, speak in complete sentences. That begins to get into can be a part of that concept, because you're carrying an idea through the changes. You're connecting ideas through the changes. It's not just a lot of short sentences. If you just play a lick on every chord, the verbal equivalent will be like, I like cats, cars are fast, ice cream is cold. You're just you're saying things, but you're not speaking in complete sentences. You're not telling a story. You're just playing unrelated ideas. So that is how you begin to get into the process of that. But again, that's conceptually that's a little more advanced. If you're just working on initially, you need to just work on connecting the chords and knowing what the chord changes are saying in a literal way. What are the notes of the chord changes? So take it slow. Arpeggios. Do it. Practice 1-3-5, 3-5-7, 5-7-1-3, 5-7-1-3, 7-1-3-5, and then as you get comfortable with that, then you can start to expand on that by doing 1-3-5-7, 3-5-7-9, 9 being the second of the scale, 7 notes of the scale. 9 minus 7 is 2. That tells you the scale degree. Just subtract 7. 3, 5, 7, 9, 5, 7, 9, 11. So it's essentially 5, 7, 2, 4 of the appropriate scale, and 7, 9, 11, 13. Then you're doing the seventh of the chord in all upper structure triads, and that's all the it's all the fancy notes. Them's all those horn player notes. So and then you start to have to decide what kind of scale you're going to use for a chord. Is the minor chord going to be Dorian? Is it going to be minor? Are you going to play Lydian? Have a sharp 11 on the major chords? Are you going to do something else? Are you going to try and turn all those dominants into altered dominants? Predetermine the scale you want to use for each chord, and then practice arpeggiating through them. You can... Oops, sorry. Not looking. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, sharp 11, 13. You can play full chord scale arpeggios once you've decided what those notes of the scale are going to be and worked out what they are and where they are. So that's kind of the end of that process. But essentially, just start with basic arpeggios. Just get those chord tones down. Because as a bass player, those are the money notes. And those are the notes that really outline the changes. And those are the notes we need to really focus on when we're playing our walking bass lines and when we're playing through changes. Also, be aware that the register of the instrument is much lower than, a trumpet or a guitar or anything else. So you have a little less leeway with what notes you play. We're down near the foundation of the harmony when we're playing. The fact is that a 13 doesn't sound as good down here against the root. It sounds all right, but it's not as obviously like, oh, that's a great note, as it might be up there against the root. I'm not using my extended range bass, so the more separation you have on your melodic note from the root, the more you can get away with using interesting and advanced harmony. You have to be very intentional when you're playing down here, because stuff can quickly start to just sound like mud or almost the right note, because we're so used to hearing those chord tones and things in this register. But that's a whole other thing. I hope this video is helpful for some of you. One thing I'll mention: don't just play the song super slow. Work on it super slow until you start to get maybe a little more comfortable, and then bump it up. I take the same process when I'm learning a tricky head, Got a Match or Spain or something like that. I work on it slow first, and then when I can play it a few times without dorking it up, then I might bump it up 5 BPM or 10 BPM, and then practice it there for a while until I can play it without dorking it up, and then just keep raising that tempo until I can play it at tempo. Same thing goes with playing through changes. Take Moment's Notice, Giant Steps, any of these tunes that are notoriously difficult to just blast through, and slow them down, even slower than I was doing it here. Give yourself time to think about the changes. And then, you know, as you start to get accustomed to playing melodically through changes, because that's the other thing, you know, when you play things like a ballad, it just sounds dopey to just start shredding up and down the fretboard. You instantaneously want to create melody, for the most part. So you kind of put yourself in the frame of mind of playing melodically through the changes. And then as you bump up that tempo, you'll retain some of that sensibility, and you'll be less inclined to just want to, you know, have the run-on sentences that never end and just blast 16th notes through changes endlessly, which is sometimes folks have that inclination. This helped me to get away from that and to put myself in a mindset of playing musically and trying to create melodies through changes, regardless of the tempo. Because I've worked on playing melodically through changes slowly, then I still want to play melodically through changes quickly. All right, that's it. I hope that helps some of you. I hope that answered your question. That's how I work on tunes like Giant Steps. Take it like a ballad, man. If you want a nice example of that, Pat Metheny has a few versions of Giant Steps played as like a mid-tempo bossa. And it's beautiful. It's a great set of changes, great tune, and it actually gives you time to like think about those changes and play through them and create melodies without just trying to frantically connect things. So, right on. Happy shedding. Be well. See you next time.